Have you ever sat alone in your living room, maybe in that favorite chair by the window, and suddenly felt a kind of heaviness in your chest? Not from illness, but from silence? Not the peaceful kind of silence, but the kind that makes you wonder if you've somehow disappeared from someone's world without even knowing it. You've raised children. You've wiped tears, packed lunches, held hands through fevered nights, and sat up waiting for them to come home safely. You gave your youth, your sleep, your energy, sometimes your entire self to be the kind of mother they needed. And now, as the years have gone by, you find yourself asking quietly, where did we go wrong? When did I become invisible? If you've ever felt this way, even just once, please know you are not alone. Today, I want to talk with you, not at you. This isn't a lecture, and it's not a list of things to fix. It's a real conversation, heart to heart. We're going to explore something deep, something many women carry but rarely talk about. The emotional wounds that mothers sometimes suffer at the hands of their own children. These wounds aren't always loud. Sometimes they don't come with arguments or angry words. Sometimes they're the wounds that show up in silence, in distance, in being left out, or made to feel like a burden. And the hardest part is, you love them anyway. But love, as you know better than anyone, should never come at the cost of your dignity. Let's begin where many of these wounds start. Not with rejection, not even with cruelty, but with something that seems harmless at first. Conditional love. It sneaks in slowly. Maybe you start noticing how your child only calls when they need something. Maybe they're warm and kind when you agree with them, when you support their choices, or when you go out of your way to please them. But when you say no, or when you express your own needs, the warmth disappears. You feel it. A shift. It's as if their love is hanging on a thread, and the only way to keep it from breaking is to keep them happy, at all costs. So you start measuring your words. You start shrinking your opinions. You begin to deny little pieces of yourself, not out of fear, but out of love. A love that now feels like a test. But love, true love, doesn't come with strings. When your child loves you only when you fit their version of how you should act or speak or think, they're not loving you. They're loving an idea of you. And here's what I want to say, especially to you, if you've been nodding through this part. You are not selfish for wanting unconditional love. You are not difficult for needing to be seen as a full person. This isn't about turning away from your child. It's about turning toward yourself. It's about remembering that your needs, your voice, your peace, those things matter. They always have. There's a quiet kind of strength that comes when you say, even just to yourself, I love my children, but I will not lose myself trying to keep their love. You don't have to choose between being a good mother and being a whole person. Now, as if conditional love wasn't heavy enough, something else often follows. Silence. Not the kind that happens because life gets busy, but the kind that lingers. That stretches into days, weeks, even months. The kind that makes you feel like you're standing in a room with a phone that never rings. No fights. No drama. Just absence. You begin to ask yourself, did I do something wrong? You replay conversations in your mind, searching for a clue, a moment, a mistake. And when you can't find one, you start making excuses for them. They're busy. They'll call when they can. Everyone drifts apart over time. But deep down, you feel it. That sting of being overlooked. Not hated, not rejected, just no longer needed. That's the second wound. The wound of being quietly dismissed. Not with words, but with distance. It's a wound that doesn't bruise the body, but it bruises the soul. Some mothers live for years like this, keeping up appearances at holidays, smiling through family dinners, sending birthday texts and never getting a reply back. They learn to live with it the way you learn to live with a limp, by adjusting your step but always feeling the pain. You may have heard someone say, "It's just how kids are these days." But let me ask you something. Since when did ignoring the woman who gave you life become acceptable? You are not too sensitive for being hurt by their silence. You are not being dramatic for missing their voice, their laugh, their presence. Wanting to be included in their lives is not a burden. It's a bond. And it hurts when that bond fades away without a word. But I want you to consider this. Maybe their silence says more about where they are in their lives than where you stand in yours. And maybe, just maybe, it's not your job to chase that silence with guilt or apology, because you were never meant to fade into the background of your own life. And when the silence grows long enough, something even harder can happen. You start to notice your place being taken by someone or something else. A partner, a friend, a career, a phone. Suddenly you're no longer the first person they call with good news. You find out about milestones from social media or a passing comment. They consult others for advice they once begged from you. And you're left wondering, have I been replaced? That's a painful question. And if you've ever asked it, please take a breath and hear me clearly. You are not replaceable. You are not a placeholder. But I know how it feels to watch the person you raised build a new life that no longer includes you the way it used to. You don't want to be jealous. You want them to grow, to succeed, to find love, to be happy. But you also want a seat at the table, any table. You want to be remembered, included, thought of, not just for what you can offer, but for who you are. When you feel replaced, it's not just sadness. It's grief. Grief for a role that's changed without warning. Grief for a version of your relationship that may never return. And that grief is real. But so is your power. Because while you can't force someone to keep you close, you can decide to keep yourself whole. You can decide to reclaim the parts of your life, your spirit, and your energy that have been waiting for you to come home to them. Even if your children don't see your value right now, you still have a life to live. A room to decorate, a garden to tend, a story to finish, with or without their applause. You matter. You still matter. And the space you occupy in this world cannot be filled by anyone else. So if your love has ever felt conditional, if the silence has lasted longer than you ever imagined, if you've ever wondered when exactly your place was taken by someone else, know that the story isn't over. And your seat at the table, the one in your own life, is still waiting for you to sit back down in it. Take a moment. Breathe. You're here. You're listening. And that means something inside you is still awake, still strong, still unwilling to live invisible. Let's keep going. Sometimes the hardest part isn't that they forgot to call or stopped inviting you. Sometimes it's what happens when they do show up, but only when it benefits them. You're not fully seen, not emotionally welcomed. You're useful, available, present when there's something they need. That kind of presence feels like absence in disguise. You're the one they call when the car breaks down, when the babysitter cancels, when a bill needs to be paid or a last-minute favor is needed. But rarely, if ever, just to talk, just to laugh, just to say, "How are you really doing, Mom?" And slowly, you start feeling like a tool in a drawer, always ready, always reliable, but forgotten when not in use. This isn't rejection in the traditional sense. It's what I call quiet abandonment, a kind of emotional neglect that doesn't come from cruelty, but from convenience. It's not that they don't love you in some way. It's that the love you gave so freely, so fully, has become something they assume will always be there. So they stop nurturing it. They stop respecting it. And they stop recognizing the human behind the helping hands. If you've ever felt like your role has shifted from mother to on-call assistant, you're not being petty. You're not ungrateful. You're recognizing a truth many try to bury. That being needed is not the same as being valued. And I want you to hear this loud and clear. You deserve to be valued. Not for what you do, but for who you are. You shouldn't have to wait by the phone, wondering when your next assignment will come. You shouldn't have to measure your worth by how much you can give or how available you are. Your worth is already written. It was never meant to be traded for convenience. The wound of being functionally abandoned runs deep because it's often hidden under a false sense of closeness. They're still in your life, but only on their terms. And that's not a relationship. That's a transaction. So here's a hard but healing truth. You can stop making yourself available to people who don't stop to see how you're really doing. You can say no to being useful if it means being unseen. You don't need to prove your value to anyone who has forgotten it. There's something liberating about setting that boundary, not with anger, but with clarity. You're not slamming the door. You're just walking through one that finally leads back to you. And sometimes it's not the silence or the absence or the neglect that cuts deepest. It's the way you're treated in public. It could be something as small as a sarcastic joke made in front of others that turns your opinion into a punchline, or a tone of voice that makes you feel like you're a burden, not a mother. It stings when your child corrects you sharply at a dinner table or rolls their eyes as if your thoughts no longer matter. These moments might seem minor to them, but to you they chip away at the foundation of your dignity. Public disrespect is one of the most painful forms of emotional injury, because it doesn't just hurt in the moment, it echoes. It echoes when you replay what was said long after everyone else has forgotten. And it hurts not just because of what they said, but because of who said it. You didn't raise them to talk to you like that. You didn't spend sleepless nights hoping one day they'd grow up and turn your voice into something to mock. You want to speak up, but often you don't. Not because you agree, but because you don't want to create conflict. You don't want to seem dramatic. You don't want to make a scene. So you swallow it. Smile politely. Stay quiet. But here's what I want you to know. Staying quiet to protect someone's ego shouldn't come at the cost of your soul. You have every right to speak up when you're being disrespected, especially by someone you love. Speaking up doesn't mean shouting. It means standing tall. It means saying calmly, clearly, "That hurt. And I won't accept being spoken to that way." Respect is not optional. It's not something you earn only if you stay small and agreeable. It's the bare minimum, especially from those who were once carried in your arms. And sometimes these moments of humiliation don't come from malice. They come from unresolved emotions your child doesn't know how to express. But that's not your burden to carry. You've already carried enough. You can't heal them by staying silent, but you can heal yourself by refusing to participate in your own diminishing. That moment you choose not to laugh at the joke, not to excuse the tone, not to ignore the sting, that's not rebellion. That's reclaiming your place. And reclaiming your place means learning how to handle blame, especially when it's unfair. There's a kind of blame that doesn't always sound loud. Sometimes it's subtle. A comment like, "You were always so strict," or "You never really understood me." You hear those words and they go straight to the heart. You start wondering, did I fail them? Was I too much? Not enough? You revisit years of decisions, sacrifices, moments where you gave all you had, and suddenly it feels like none of it counted. Like you're being reduced to a few old mistakes. That's the cruel part about unfair blame. It turns your entire story into a courtroom, and you're the one on trial with no chance to defend yourself. But here's what I want you to know. You do not have to live the rest of your life apologizing for being human. You made choices. Maybe some were wrong. Maybe some were survival. Maybe some were just the best you could do with what you had at the time. That doesn't make you a villain. That makes you a person. A mother who showed up even when no one showed up for her. And if your child cannot see that, if they refuse to see your full humanity, that's not a reflection of your failure. It's a reflection of their pain. And their pain is not your identity. You can acknowledge their feelings without accepting their version of the story as the only truth. You have a right to your story too. You can say, yes, I made mistakes, but I also gave everything I had. And I won't live under guilt that no longer belongs to me. That's not denial. That's dignity. And dignity doesn't mean being perfect. It means choosing to live with self-respect, even when others try to take it from you. If you've made it this far, it means your heart is still open, still strong, still capable of healing. And healing doesn't begin with anyone else. It begins with how you see yourself. You are not just a collection of who you were. You are who you are now, wiser, braver, and still worthy of love that does not ask you to shrink. Take a deep breath. You're not just surviving this chapter, you're rewriting it. Some wounds are loud, like arguments or slammed doors. Others are quiet, so quiet you don't even notice them at first. But they're there. They settle in slowly, like dust in the corners of a home that once felt full of life. And one of the quietest, most painful wounds of all is the feeling that somehow you've been replaced. Maybe it wasn't obvious at first. You told yourself, they're growing, they're building their lives. You cheered them on, helped them move into their first apartments, welcomed new partners, new routines. You clapped for them from the sidelines like you always did. But one day, it hits you. You're no longer their safe place. You're not the first phone call anymore. You're not the voice they seek when the world gets heavy. Someone else has taken that space. Or maybe not someone, maybe something. A job, a phone, a lifestyle. You've been gently, silently, emotionally replaced. And you wonder if you're overreacting. You tell yourself not to be dramatic. But there it is, that deep ache that whispers, you don't matter like you used to. This wound doesn't come with a goodbye. It comes with slow drifting, with not being invited, with decisions made without you, with hearing about important events secondhand. It's like being in a room where the lights slowly dim until you realize you're standing in the dark. But here's what I want you to know, and I hope it reaches the part of you that needs to hear it the most. Your value is not determined by who includes you. Your voice does not disappear just because someone stops listening. And your presence is not erased because others have moved on. You still exist. You still matter. And you still have the right to be seen, not just remembered. It's okay to grieve this shift, because it is a loss of the closeness you once had, the rituals, the laughter, the sense of being at the center of someone's world. You're allowed to miss that. But you're also allowed to create something new, not with the people who've replaced you, but with yourself. You don't need to compete for space in someone else's life. You can build your own space, a space where you are cherished, honored, and whole. That might mean exploring a new hobby, making a new friend, saying yes to things you once put aside for everyone else. It might even mean saying no to people who only call when they want something, and yes to the quiet joy of being with yourself. You were never meant to be a backup plan. You are not a placeholder. You are the centerpiece of your own life, and it's time to return to that truth. And now we arrive at a wound that's perhaps the most hidden and the most devastating. It doesn't shout. It doesn't accuse. It seeps in like guilt and settles like shame. It's the wound of inherited shame. Not because of something you did, but because of what you've been made to carry. Sometimes your child doesn't just criticize your parenting, they blame you for everything they've struggled with in adulthood. You weren't loving enough, or you were too controlling, too soft, too absent, too protective. They hold up your imperfections like proof that you're the reason their life didn't turn out exactly as planned. And over time, without realizing it, you begin to agree. You start apologizing for things you're not even sure were wrong. You begin to walk through life with your shoulders a little lower, your voice a little quieter, your light a little dimmer. Because maybe they're right. Maybe you really did mess it all up. Stop right there. Let me say this as clearly and gently as I can. You are not the villain in their story. You made choices, yes. You made sacrifices. You made mistakes. You got tired. You got overwhelmed. But you also showed up. You gave what you had. You worked with what you knew. And if your children can't see the full picture, if they can only see the cracks but not the strength, the pain but not the love, that says more about where they are in their journey than about where you stand. Shame is not yours to carry. Especially not shame placed on you by people who've never tried to understand the depth of your story. You don't owe the world a perfect version of motherhood. You were real. You were present. You did the best you could in a world that often gave you very little help. There is no greater injustice than asking a mother to spend her later years paying off a debt of love she already gave freely. You don't have to keep apologizing. Not to them. Not to yourself. What you do have to do is release. Let go of the guilt that never belonged to you. Let go of the burden that was never yours. Let go of the idea that love means constantly proving your worth. You've already proved it. You're still here, still loving, still open. And that, more than anything, is enough. You are not a shameful chapter in someone else's life story. You are the beginning of it. The root, the foundation, the one who made sure they had food, warmth, comfort, and a place to grow, even if they've now forgotten how hard that was for you. You don't need their understanding to forgive yourself. You don't need their permission to live free. So today, I invite you to say something out loud, even if your voice trembles. My story deserves respect. Say it again. Write it in the comments. Whisper it if you must. But believe it, because it's true. You've carried so much. You've been quiet for too long. And maybe today is the first time you've heard someone speak what you've been feeling in your heart. You don't have to beg for love. You don't have to wait for a call to matter. You don't have to keep shrinking to fit into someone else's idea of who you should be. You get to take up space. You get to speak. You get to live. Not as a shadow, not as a side note, but as the main character in your own life. And if anyone has ever made you feel like you're too emotional, too sensitive, too much, let them go. Because you are just enough. You always were. This is not just the end of a video. It could be the beginning of something beautiful. A new season. A stronger voice. A life lived with quiet power and unshakable dignity. So if you've made it this far, I want to thank you. Not just for watching, but for being brave enough to feel this with me. If this touched your heart, I encourage you to leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Type the words, "My story deserves respect." Because saying it out loud is how the healing begins. And if you're ready to keep walking this journey together, subscribe to Strong Elderly Life. This channel isn't about noise or shallow advice. It's a space where you're seen, where your years mean wisdom, not invisibility, where you don't have to apologize for your truth. Here's to walking with grace. Here's to never begging again. Here's to living with your head held high. You are not alone, and you are far from finished.